In 480 BC, the Greek city-states were exhausted. Decades of destructive infighting had left them vulnerable, while to the east, the mighty Persian Empire commanded the wealth and resources of 3 continents. Sophisticated Greeks viewed the northern kingdom of Macedonia as a backwater, but King Philip II took these mountainous tribes and drilled them into a professional standing army. This diagram illustrates Philip's main mechanical advantage. Instead of the standard 8-foot spear used by most Greeks, his infantry wielded the sarissa, an 18-foot pike. Packed tightly into a phalanx formation, they presented an impenetrable, moving wall of iron. Philip used this army to force the rest of Greece into an alliance, and he began planning a massive invasion of the Persian Empire. But on the eve of launching that war, he was assassinated by his own bodyguard. Command fell to his 20-year-old son, Alexander. He inherited his father's grand invasion plan, taking a force of about 40,000 men across the Hellespont to face a Persian superpower, capable of fielding armies twice his size. A young, untested king, leading a much smaller force into hostile territory, usually ends in a quick defeat. Instead, it triggered a 10-year campaign that swallowed the known world. Alexander survived the early years of the campaign through sheer aggression. At the battles of the Granicus and Issus, he used reckless shock tactics, personally leading cavalry charges directly at the Persian leadership to break their lines. By the time he reached Gaugamela in modern Iraq, the Persian king Darius III was waiting for him. Darius had flattened the terrain to maximize his massive numerical advantage and deploy his scythed war chariots. This map of the battlefield shows Alexander's opening maneuver. Outnumbered, he marched his right wing outward. Thinking the Greeks were trying to outflank them, the Persians mirrored the movement, pulling troops away from their center to keep pace. It was a trap. The moment a gap formed in the overextended Persian line, Alexander wheeled his elite companion cavalry around, driving a wedge straight through the center toward Darius himself. The ferocity of the assault threw the Persian command into a panic. Darius fled the battlefield, his vast army routed, and the road to the capital of Babylon was left wide open. But military victories were only part of the story. Earlier, in Egypt, local priests had welcomed Alexander as a liberator, crowned him pharaoh, and at a desert oracle, validated him as the son of Amun, king of the gods. The mounting evidence of his own invincibility, coupled with divine recognition, shifted Alexander's focus. He began viewing himself not as a mortal king, but as a being destined for global rule. The official rationale for the war evaporated when Darius was eventually murdered by his own men. But rather than return to Macedonia, Alexander ordered the army deeper into Asia. He claimed he wanted to be a liberator. Yet, in an act of brutal retribution for past wars, he pillaged and torched the ceremonial capital of Persepolis. The campaign then devolved into a miserable guerrilla war. His men spent months fighting hostile local tribes across the unforgiving, jagged terrain of Bactria and the Hindu Kush Mountains. As they suffered, they watched their king adopt the customs of the enemy they had just conquered. He started wearing Persian dress and attempted to force his Greek soldiers to perform proskynesis, prostrating themselves face down before him. For the Persians, this was standard royal protocol, but for the Greeks, a free man bowed to no one but a god. Forcing his battle-hardened veterans to worship him as a deity shattered their loyalty, crossing the line from military leadership into religious blasphemy. Isolated and paranoid, Alexander turned on his own. When an assassination plot was uncovered, he tortured and executed Philotas, the commander of his cavalry. Then he sent assassins to murder Philotas's father, Parmenion, his most senior and successful general, just in case he rebelled. The violence eventually reached his inner circle. During a drunken argument, Alexander grabbed a spear and killed Clitus the Black, one of his oldest friends, and the very man who had saved his life at the river Grammicus. The army dragged itself into India, culminating in the Battle of the Hydaspes. The Greeks took devastating casualties fighting King Porus, largely due to the sheer terror of facing armored war elephants in close combat. Alexander won the battle and immediately ordered preparations to march further east. But at the river Hephaestus, the soldiers finally broke. They had marched thousands of miles over 8 years, and they simply refused to take another step. Furious but powerless, Alexander was forced to turn back. He had dismantled the greatest superpower of the ancient world without losing a single battle, only to be stopped by the sheer physical and psychological exhaustion of his own men. Back in Babylon, Alexander tried one last desperate measure to unify his fractured domains. He staged a massive forced marriage ceremony, pairing his Macedonian officers with Persian noblewomen to engineer a blended ruling class. He was already planning his next conquest into Arabia when he developed a sudden, severe fever. Days later, at just 32 years old, the king was dead. With no clear plan for succession, his surviving generals immediately turned on each other. They tore his vast, unstable empire into competing kingdoms, fighting decades of civil war. Yet, as the political borders collapsed, the cultural ones vanished. Alexander's violent, decade-long march scattered Greek ideas, art, and language from the Mediterranean world all the way to Central Asia, creating a hybridized world known as the Hellenistic Age. While Alexander's obsession fractured his own house, his march scattered Greek art, science, and governance across 3 continents. The result was a hybrid civilization that outlasted his empire by centuries.